Bolivia's march for the homeland continues to advance across the country in defense of the democratic and cultural revolution under the government of President Luis Arce. Russian authorities have approved the use of a new vaccine named Sputnik M to be used on children aged 12 to 17, with shots expected to be available by the end of December. The Moroccan capital saw protests on Wednesday in support of the Palestinian cause and against the visit of Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Bolivia, where the March for the Homeland continues to advance in defense of the democratic and cultural revolution led by the government of President Luis Arce. Participants arrived in Panduro on Tuesday, located in the department of La Paz, and reiterated their resolve to prevent any attempt at destabilization by the far right, which they stressed is seeking a repeat of the 2019 coup against the government of Evo Morales. The marchers were welcomed upon their arrival amidst cheers and the waving of huipalas, the flag representing the indigenous peoples, as the local population expressed its support for the mobilization. Executive Secretary of the Bolivian Workers' Center, Juan Carlos Guarachi, emphasized that the march headed for the city of La Paz also seeks to build the unity of the people.
Surely, day by day, more and more will join this process of seeking to strengthen our government, always seeking to strengthen democracy and unity.
Mexican immigration authorities have offered temporary residency permits on humanitarian grounds to 2,500 asylum seekers heading towards the United States, who set off in a caravan last week. Those accepting the assistance will be transferred to 10 different states around the country, according to the National Institute of Migration, which held talks with representatives of the caravan in the southern state of Chiapas. An official informed that as well as the residency permits, accommodation in shelters and employment options are being offered to those who voluntarily abandon the caravan and a dangerous journey north. The humanitarian residency permits are for 1 year and can be renewed. Officials said last week that around 1,500 people in another caravan that left the southern city of Tapachula on foot on October 23rd had also accepted the temporary residency offer. Chilean presidential candidate José Antonio Cast had to flee a campaign event under police escort as local residents made it known fascists are not welcome. The visit of the far-right presidential candidate to the working-class neighborhood of Lo Espejo in the southwest of the capital Santiago and one of the poorest neighborhoods located in the metropolitan region of the Chilean capital sparked indignation. Residents stressed that Cast, whose voiced tributes to the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet, is against abortion and same-sex marriage and has said he will build a ditch to prevent the entry of so-called illegal immigrants, was not welcome and mobilized to force him to leave the area. The Republican Party candidate, who won in Sunday's first round of the presidential election with 27.9%, will face centre-left candidate Gabriel Boric, who obtained 25.8% in the second round vote on December 19th. At least 22 miners have died in bombings by the Colombian army against camps of the former Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia People's Army during the administration of Colombian President Ivan Duque. The situation was denounced by Ivan Cepeda, senator for the Alternative Democratic Pole Party, who revealed in a press conference that his legislative work unit carried out an investigation into the number of children killed in bombed camps based on reports from the forensic unit at the Institute of Legal Medicine. According to the senator, most of the deceased miners were aged between 15 and 17 years old, but some were as young as 10 to 13 years old. As detailed in the documentation sent to the Institute, of the 22 miners killed, 13 were boys, 7 girls, and there were 2 whose sex was impossible to determine given the state of their bodies. The investigation also revealed the systematic practice of carrying out airstrikes against places where children and adolescents are located. And United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres expressed his concern regarding illegal armed groups in Colombia during an event in Antioquia department to mark the 5th anniversary of the historic peace accords signed between the Colombian government and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia People's Army in Havana.
I was concerned when I heard that several regions are still affected by the impact of insecurity, the actions of illegal armed groups, and the assassinations of local leaders. Former combatants and human rights defenders, as a result of such acts, are dashing the hopes of the communities. Peace in Colombia necessarily requires peace in the territories, and I encourage you to seize this historic opportunity to turn the desire for peace into reality.
A year after his death, the cult of Diego Maradona runs strong in the streets of the Italian city of Naples. 30 years ago, Diego Maradona ended his remarkable playing spell at Napoli Football Club, but a year on from his death, he's as present as ever for fans. His name is stitched onto shirts, daubed on walls of the Italian city, and etched into people's hearts. On the first anniversary of his death, a bronze statue will be unveiled in front of the stadium named after him.
After learning about Maradona's death, as a Neapolitan, it was as if something was missing in my life, in my daily life. And so I decided to pay tribute to the Argentine champion through a work that gives him eternity. As a Neapolitan, as a fan of the Napoli soccer team, above all, but also as a sculptor, the only thing I could do was to pay tribute to him with a sculpture that honors him. I wanted to represent Maradona as an athlete, in all his physical strength, as we see him moving here, but also as if he were a Greek god. For me, Diego is a god, and to see all the flags here and the fact that he has conquered the heart of Naples, it's crazy. I came here just for that, to see the murals and see how the people love him, how they love the Argentines too. Diego is in the heart of the Neapolitans.
I didn't just want to see Napoli, but also I wanted to see how the Neapolitans remember Diego, his story, and not just his story as a football baller, as a sportsman, but also his life.
And we'll be right back after this very short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Russian authorities have approved the use of a new vaccine named Sputnik M to be used on children aged 12 to 17, with shots expected to be available by the end of December. According to the director of the Gamaleya National Research Centre for Epidemiology and Microbiology, the dose of the Sputnik vaccine for teens will be 5 times lower and that for younger children 10 times lower than the dose given to adults. Scientists also informed there will be a nasal spray version of the Sputnik V vaccine available soon, which will be used as a booster shot. Clinical trials of the Sputnik vaccine in children and teenagers aged 12 to 17 years began in Moscow on June 5th. The World Health Organization on Wednesday warned governments not to rely on vaccines alone to tackle rising COVID-19 rates, noting that people who were vaccinated could still transmit the virus.
Last week, more than 60% of all reported cases and deaths from COVID-19 globally were once again in Europe. The sheer number of cases is translating to unsustainable pressure on health systems and exhausted health workers. In many countries and communities, we're concerned about a false sense of security that vaccines have ended the pandemic and that people who are vaccinated do not need to take any other precautions. If you're vaccinated, you have a much lower risk of severe disease and death. But you're still at risk of being infected and of infecting others. We cannot say this clearly enough.
The World Health Organization also warned that coronavirus cases jumped by 11% in Europe in the last week, the only region in the world where COVID-19 has continued to increase since mid-October. In its weekly assessment of the pandemic, the UN Health Agency said cases and deaths globally have risen by about 6%, with about 3.6 million new infections and 50,000 new deaths reported in the previous week. WHO Europe's director Hans Kluge warned that without urgent measures, the continent could see another 700,000 deaths by the spring. The official called for countries to increase vaccination and to adopt other control measures like masking and social distancing to avoid more lockdowns. In the last week, Austria, the Netherlands and Belgium have all adopted stricter measures, including partial lockdowns and vaccine mandates to try to stem the latest surge of the coronavirus. And on Wednesday, the EU Health Agency called for urgent COVID measures, recommending vaccine booster shots for all adults over the age of 18, with a priority for people above 40 years old. The agency also urged countries to increase their overall vaccination rates, especially those with low uptake, as Europe faces a surge in cases.
Modeling scenarios run by ECDC for the most recent rapid risk assessment on COVID-19 indicate that the potential burden of disease risk in the EU EEA from the Delta variant is very high in December and January, unless public health measures are applied now in combination with continued efforts to increase vaccine uptake in the total population.
Russian President Vladimir Putin issued another call on Wednesday to skeptical Russians to vaccinate themselves against COVID-19. Putin also said he took part in trials of a nasal COVID vaccine and that he had experienced no problems after receiving a booster jab last week. Despite repeated pleas, only around 37% of Russians are fully vaccinated, and the country has seen more than 1,000 COVID-19 deaths a day in recent weeks. Russia is one of the world's hardest hit countries and is struggling with widespread opposition to vaccination, even though it's developed several homegrown jabs, including Sputnik V.
For my part, I recommend that everybody be not only vaccinated in a time, but also revaccinated, which is extremely important. Exactly 6 months after the vaccination, my antibody numbers dropped, and the experts recommended a booster vaccination procedure, which I did a few days ago. I first received it in the form of an injection, and the next day, after talking to Denis Yudevich, he himself, by the way, conducted the second part of the procedure. He sprayed the powder in nasal form. So, what is this? It is the same syringe, but instead of a liquid substance, he took the powder, asked me to inhale deeply 3 times. He sprayed one side, then the other, and I sat there for 15 minutes, and that was it. I didn't feel anything, to be honest. I just sat there for 15 minutes. That's all.
The second round of talks between the United States and the Taliban since the withdrawal from Afghanistan is to take place in Qatar. Next week, the US and the Taliban will resume talks to deal with the issues related to the humanitarian crisis and to prevent the country from becoming a launchpad for terrorism. The US delegation will be led by Tom West, the special representative for Afghanistan, who had already met with the Taliban in November. US officials had previously spent months negotiating with a Taliban delegation in Qatar, reaching a deal in February of 2020 that preceded the US withdrawal and Taliban return to power after 20 years of foreign war and destruction. The US has not officially recognized the Taliban government, but announced in early November that Qatar would serve as Washington's diplomatic representative in the country. Sweden's Prime Minister-elect Magdalena Andersson on Wednesday tendered her resignation just hours after her appointment by Parliament, after her budget failed to pass and the Greens party left the coalition government, after Parliament voted for a budget drawn up by the opposition, which includes the anti-immigrant far right.
The Green Party has now announced that it no longer wishes to be part of the government. Each party must take its own choices. According to the constitutional practice, a coalition government should resign if a party leaves the government. My assessment is that the same should naturally apply if Parliament has elected a new Prime Minister, but the new government has not yet taken office.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Morocco saw protests in support of the Palestinian cause as Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz visited amid a heavy security presence. Police dispersed a group of pro-Palestinian protesters who tried to demonstrate near Parliament in the Moroccan capital Rabat late on Wednesday. The demonstrators condemned the normalization of ties with Israel as treason. Morocco normalized ties with the Israeli regime last December, shortly after similar announcements by the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, following pacts brokered by former US President Donald Trump. The pacts were denounced by supporters of the Palestinian cause as breaking with the Arab world's stance against recognizing Israel until it agrees to a peace deal establishing a Palestinian state with its capital in occupied East Jerusalem. In return for normalizing ties with Israel, the Trump administration recognized Morocco's sovereignty over the disputed territory of Western Sahara, trampling on the rights of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic.
Against the will of the Moroccan people, the war criminal, Israel Defense Minister Benny Gantz, has been welcomed to Rabat. Benny Gantz, whose hands are stained with the blood of the innocent.
We came to protest against the visit of the war criminal, the Zionist minister, to Morocco. We do not accept his visit, and we consider it a mistake and a betrayal to the Moroccans. He is a war criminal who should be prosecuted. His place is not in our country.
The United Nations has presented a report on Yemen which confirms that after 7 years of war, more than 300,000 people have been killed. According to the search carried out by the multilateral organization, 150,000 people were directly killed by the conflict sparked by the military intervention led by Saudi Arabia. The other fatalities, some 60%, are indirect deaths, that is, people dying of thirst, hunger and disease. The United Nations Development Programme stressed that the 7 years of war have had catastrophic effects on the development of the poorest nation in the Gulf and that the situation could worsen. The report also notes that a child under the age of 5 dies every 9 minutes in Yemen. India's Federal Cabinet of Ministers on Wednesday approved a proposal to repeal the 3 agricultural laws that sparked massive protests. The move came days after Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced his government's decision to withdraw the laws amid continued farmers' protests. The Farm Laws Repeal Bill 2021 was taken up by the Union Cabinet at a meeting earlier in the day and given the stamp of approval. The bills aimed at rolling back 3 other bills passed into law last year: the Farmers' Produce Trade and Commerce Act, Farm Services Act and Essential Commodities Act. As per Prime Minister Modi's address, the 3 laws will be repealed formally during the winter session of Parliament, which starts from November 29th. More than 100,000 Rohingya refugees have been forcibly relocated to a remote island in breach of an agreement with the United Nations on a voluntary relocation project. Different organisations have urged the government of Bangladesh to stop the relocation. Although the authorities insist the migrants accepted relocation voluntarily, everything seems to indicate that the refugees were either not informed of the conditions of the area or that they are in fact being forced to move to the island of Bhasan Char. According to UN data, the authorities have so far relocated some 20,000 members of this harassed and persecuted minority to an island of almost 40 square kilometres in the Bay of Bengal. On Tuesday, teleSUR's president, Patricia Villegas, held a meeting with representatives of Mozambique Television and the Ghanaian network Pan-African TV, with the aim of strengthening the Latin American news network's ties with these African media outlets. Mozambique Television was represented by its program director, Holden Guedes, while Pan-African TV was headed by its director, Kwesi Pratt. At the meeting, the managers of these television stations agreed on the need to continue promoting the news agenda focused on the Global South as a way of counteracting the one-sided narrative that has been historically imposed on world public opinion by powerful countries. After the talks, a cooperation agreement was signed between teleSUR and Mozambique Television to exchange bi-regional information as well as technical and professional training of workers.
We are here to see if we can make a cooperation agreement between Mozambique Television and teleSUR. The starting point is to share strength from one side to the other. We are expecting to be able to work together to broadcast relevant information about our countries from one side to the other. We are very much looking forward to this. We agreed on a mutually beneficial cooperation, and maybe we can reach a broader cooperation beyond just information exchange, such as joint training, for example.
Well, we've already started collaborating with teleSUR. I was here about 3 years ago. This is the 3rd time I've come into the headquarters of teleSUR. And teleSUR has already sent a technical person to evaluate the work that we are doing. We've not been able to move forward because of the pandemic. It's not been possible, for example, to have exchange of personnel, technical personnel. It's not been possible to do joint training, and it's not been possible to do joint production of documentaries and so on. But the spirit is there. It's important that television stations and media houses across the world collaborate in order to give true meaning to the wishes of our people, in order to stand up to the bullies of the empire and so on. So we intend to intensify the collaboration with teleSUR for for the mutual benefit of the African people and also for the people of South America. We are broadcasting to 46 countries in Africa, and we are also broadcasting to Europe, and a combination of teleSUR and Pan-African television would go a very, very long way in breaking down the barriers which was imposed by the colonial empire and by the imperialist empire.
And we've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For teleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.